Alright guys, Murph's here, and today, at viewer request, we're going to take another look at the truck gun concept. We're just going to take it at a slightly different angle. Now, longtime viewers of the channel will know that I did a previous video on the truck gun concept, which if you're interested in that, go ahead and check out the link in the description, in which I talked about guns that I would employ from within a vehicle, and the features that I look for, the circumstances that I would utilize these types of firearms, all that kind of stuff. Mostly for long drives and all those types of things, though I have taken to keeping a 9mm SBR in the truck on the weekends, whenever it is that I go about my daily things. This particular viewer requested a truck gun video on what I would mount to a truck. So basically, they're asking to talk about technicals, or in U.S. government parlance, non-standard tactical vehicles, or NSTVs. So guys, this video is a little bit more along the lines of like a thought exercise video, which I haven't done one of those in a really long time, come to think of it. So I'm not necessarily going to have any weapon systems to showcase for you. There's not going to necessarily be a whole lot of shooting involved in this video. As it turns out, the guys at work would not let me bring in machine guns to be able to display for this purpose. Who knew? Crazy. But we are going to discuss this topic, so this is something that you don't necessarily find interesting. Go ahead and check out the original truck gun video for something that's maybe a little bit more practical or applicable to your day-to-day life. Technicals. We need to go ahead and define what a technical is. A technical is a non-military vehicle that's being utilized for military purposes. So what I mean by non-military is it's not a tactical vehicle. It's not got a whole bunch of armor and, fancy systems on it and all this kind of stuff. It's just your run-of-the-mill, probably Toyota Hilux. That is the most popular technical out there on the market, fighting wars all over the world. But also, it could be any number of pickup trucks, Jeeps, somebody's mounted a minigun on a Toyota Prius before, like any vehicle that was not meant to be a military vehicle that then you then pack with military equipment is a technical. Okay, so with that being the case, Murph, in your opinion, what is the best application of a technical? Who utilizes technicals to begin with? So it's going to be militias, militant groups, insurgents, freedom fighters, people who do not have access to military hardware, or very poor countries that don't have access to as much military hardware as they would like, are going to run these types of systems. Any of your more populated nations and stuff like that, for the most part, are not going to run technicals, except in the circumstance of the United States Green Berets. Green Berets will still train around NSTVs because they are supposed to support indigenous forces in different countries, or foreign militaries, which may have those types of systems available to them. So the Green Berets need to be familiar with their application, with their capabilities, and all those types of things. So the Green Berets were stood up for the purpose of being able to train indigenous populations to throw off communism. And though over the last 20 years that was a job they started to get away from, they're now jumping back into it full time. That characterized a lot of like the ending of Afghanistan prior to the massive withdrawal. We're not going to get too far into that, as well as what's still going on in Iraq, Africa, Poland, a lot of other countries right now. Oh yeah, that's Lefroy. Very peaty. Ooh, a little sweet touch to it. Ah, that's nice. Smoky and sweet. Great combination. All right, so my opinion, how do you best apply a technical? I think the advantage of a technical lies in high mobility and off-road conditions. You can set up a fairly small, lightweight truck to be able to cross terrain that a larger vehicle would have to do so more slowly. So a tank or something like a Humvee or an MATV or whatever may be able to cross that same terrain, but they may not necessarily be able to do it at the same rate of speed, or there might be certain areas that they cannot traverse because of the nature of how those vehicles are designed. Less so the Humvee, but very much so the MATV or a lot of other vehicles along that same trend. And I think one of the greatest strengths, this is going to sound weird, but let me explain. One of the greatest strengths of the technical is when it is unarmored. Now, Murph, why would you not want armor on the technical in this case? Well, there's a lot of things you got to take into consideration whenever it is that you load a vehicle down with armor. First off, when we're talking about a lot of these countries, they're not getting like hardened steel and stuff like that to be able to utilize as armor on these vehicles. They're using whatever scrap metal's lying around. And in order to be able to replicate the same capabilities of even fairly light armor, they're going to have to pack on more steel in order to do it, which is going to increase the weight of the vehicle, which is going to degrade its off-road capability. Now, in addition to that, whenever it is that you pack a vehicle with armor, you have to take in the consideration everything else that supports that vehicle. So I've worked around a lot of armored non-tactical military vehicles, and I've seen it done right and I've seen it done incredibly wrong. So I remember working at a place where they had an armored Suburban and that thing was maxed out on armor. It was absolutely very strong, very bulletproof. However, nobody upgraded the suspension, and that thing would bottom out on a pothole. Same kind of deal with another place that I worked where we had a couple of very nice armored pickup trucks and SUVs and all that kind of stuff. But we were going through tires about every week and a half because the tires that we were using did not have the proper load range for the weight that we were putting on them. I've seen that also deadline military tactical vehicles as well, where you don't have the proper weight range on a armored Humvee and you're blowing out tires every other week. Those are things you have to take into account whenever it is that you up armor a vehicle. That's something that's going to be a little bit more difficult to be able to sustain for a technical, and in my opinion, degrades it from its actual ability. This is an attempt to try to make it do everything. Speed and mobility are the advantages of the technical. Being able to get into a place that everyone thought was unreachable, attack your opponent, and then withdraw without the ability to be effectively pursued is its own type of armor. Now, of course, it's not necessarily a good substitute for armor. There's quite a few things you have to take into account if you're going to go muzzle to muzzle with like tanks or any other type of anti-tank weapon system, but that's stuff we're going to get into more as we go along. When you pack on a bunch of armor onto these types of vehicles, you increase their weight. And then if you try to combine that with better off-road capabilities, like maybe larger tires, a jacked up suspension, all that kind of stuff, you now make this very heavy thing very tall, which means that it's very top heavy and increases its possibility of flipping over. Now, in a lightweight technical, it wouldn't be that hard for you to roll it and then be able to upright it. You could use a lot of the equipment that you see strapped to like people's Jeeps for people who never actually go out and use a Jeep for what it's intended for. It's just their glorified grocery getter. You put that same type of equipment onto a technical and you can upright yourself and get back onto mission much faster. Whereas if you try to take an MATV through perhaps that same terrain and you misjudge the terrain and roll an MATV, you're going to need a wrecker to get that thing back up and going. As you increase the armor, you decrease the capability of the system to be self-sustaining. At the loss of mobility, which is not, in my opinion, a good trade-off when we're talking about a system that was never meant to be used in this manner to begin with. So trying to optimize it for this purpose is not helpful. Now, there's one circumstance in which armoring something made sense, and as much as I hate giving credit to a terrorist organization, ISIS had a trend of armoring their suicide VBIDs, which would be vehicle-borne improvised explosive device. So they would take like large trucks, pack them full of tens of thousands of pounds of explosives, and then cover the whole thing in steel. That way, as they approached an entry control point, they were increasing the survivability of the delivery system to actually get it to its target, so they could get to where it needs to go and blink that base out of existence. That's the only time the armor makes sense, but that's for a one-way attack option, not something that I'm looking to reuse, not something that I'm looking to optimize around the battlefield. So that being the case, how do you optimize a technical around the battlefield, in your opinion, Murph? In my relatively unqualified opinion, I would add, of course, I am no military strategist nor expert. However, in my opinion, I see a couple of advantages to the technical. Very obvious is ambushes. You could ambush somebody's supply line, you could ambush a column of tanks or something along those lines, and then be able to fade into the darkness, fade into the trees. One of the things that I think about with that is kind of like having a Samurai Ninja with a 240, Samurai Ninja. The Isuzu Samurai with like a 240 attached to it. That's a very small off-road vehicle. You could really get that into some tight spaces, some very, very thick foliage and stuff like that, and actually be able to make it to your objective. Attack that objective, spray down a supply convoy or whatever, and then escape back through that dense stuff that nobody else can really pursue you through effectively. And then another circumstance that I think is really fantastic for the technical is utilizing it as dragoons. Now, it's been a long time since I've talked about dragoons on this channel, but dragoons are a type of mounted rifle cavalry. you know that the enemy is going to go seize a key objective, or you have a key objective that you want to secure in order for follow-on forces to be able to exploit. And there's a key piece of terrain, there's a town or something like that that you want to take control of. You send in the dragoons, and this is going back to old cavalry terms, but you send in the dragoons. They ride out, they get there, they dismount, they establish a defensive perimeter, and then they hold that ground. Or perhaps you use them as a masking force. You send them out as a picket line or something along those lines in order to be able to increase your preparedness for an enemy counterattack or something along those lines. You are sending them out for a very specific purpose. They are able to occupy that area quickly and then also evacuate that area very quickly because you have these high mobility vehicles. That's where I think the technical would really thrive in kind of an offensive capacity. With considerations taken, we'll get into that more here in a bit. All right, Murph, so there's the kind of like application piece and like the tactics piece. What do you consider to be optimal weapons to place onto your technical? Well, first we need to talk about the mounting system. I have seen NSTVs set up to where you're basically mounting a machine gun to like the roll bar across the back of a truck. That only gives you less than 180-degree field of fire, and you can pretty much only shoot in whatever direction the truck is pointing. That I do not consider to be helpful. And a lot of these systems, and we'll break it down in the specifics as we go through, but in a lot of these systems, you're gonna thrive better if you have some sort of 360-degree pintle mount. Now, in addition to that, if we're talking about like arming these things up to the nines, you can put swivel arms in the windows of your NSTV as well. And I've seen that type of setup before, and it can be pretty awesome. Like you can go from having one machine gun to having 3 or 4. Now, because obviously the driver's not necessarily going to be able to drive and handle a machine gun effectively at the same time. Now, what weapon systems? Early on when I was thinking about this video, I completely sidelined anything chambered in an intermediate cartridge. But when you talk about door-mounted swing arms, that is when a belt-fed intermediate cartridge system makes sense to me. So that's where your 249 would come in, because you're not necessarily using this for vehicle engagement as much as you're using this to defend against personnel. So you're doing some like desert rats type stuff. You're going to sweep through an airfield and you're going to spray everything down with bullets. You know, you can have your dedicated weapon system in the back, in the bed of the truck. That's a higher caliber, greater casualty producing weapon system, really drumming on those planes. While machine guns are taking care of ground personnel, providing security, all that, while the 249s or set-me-a-mellies or whatever it is that it may be are taking care of ground personnel. But those are the only applications that I see feasible for an intermediate cartridge chambered weapon system, and preferably belt-fed, because magazines are going to wind up taking a lot more space in something that's already confined. And you have to do magazine swaps and all that kind of stuff. It's just really not as helpful. So an RPK, excuse me, an RPK, not so much. A 249, absolutely. All right, now, what would I recommend being in the bed of the truck? It starts off at some sort of 7.62 caliber machine gun. So be it a 240 or a PKM, an M60, a Sana 77, I don't really care. Some sort of 30 caliber machine gun is where I would start for like, this is my dedicated technical, this is what it is that I'm going to utilize to attack people. And that's because that technical would be effective at knocking out other enemy technicals. It wouldn't necessarily work out that well against light armor, though you can get armor-piercing ammunition, the M80A1 and all that kind of stuff. You can get armor-piercing ammunition for 30 caliber machine guns. It's just not necessarily like, that's kind of like a, okay, well this happened to be able to work out in this case. You know, I'm fighting personnel, they have body armor on. I can hopefully expect that my 30 caliber machine gun is going to rip through that body armor. But other unarmored technicals, the 240 would do a very good job of being able to knock out. Hopefully before they knock you out. So, starts off with those weapon systems. That's a very light application. I'm looking primarily at anti-personnel and then also being able to counter other technicals. Going up from there, we of course come to the venerable 50 cals, the M2, things like the Dushka and NSV, all those types of things. 50 caliber machine guns. The issue with 50 cals on a technical, and this is a time-honored tradition, there's plenty of examples of technicals being mounted with 50 caliber machine guns of some sort. The biggest issue that you run into with these is that the 50 cal generates a lot of recoil, and it can, on these lighter trucks, cause a lot of suspension wobble, which could negatively impact your accuracy. However, you're going to get a lot of advantage when it comes to defeating light armor. especially since the 50 cal comes in a variety. If you're talking about like the M2, the 12.7 by 99 millimeter Browning comes in a variety of military loadings. You can get ball, AP, API, high explosive rounds, and then the slap rounds, which would really make the technical pretty fearsome on the battlefield if I'd ever seen slap rounds actually worth anything out of an M2. So that's something to consider there. Now, in my opinion, you would probably want to primarily engage forward, but a 50 cal is not so bad that if you swung it to the left or right, that would really mess you up that bad. It's just something that you're going to want to train your, fictitious technical gunners on, shooting sideways and all that kind of stuff. Shooting to the 9 and 3 o'clock positions accordingly. All right, so that covers the 50 cals. I think one of the better applications for technical would be to have a Mark 19 mounted on it. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Mark 19 is a 40 millimeter automatic grenade launcher. Another suitable substitute would be the AGS-17 30 millimeter grenade launcher from Russia. Regardless, getting that grenade launcher capability. One of the great things with the 40 millimeter is that you can get HEDP rounds, which give you a fragmentation effect as well as an anti-armor effect. It's supposed to be able to penetrate 3 inches of cold rolled steel. It's still a pretty small hole that you're punching through that steel, but it's better than nothing. And this is going to really up the game. First off, 40 millimeter rounds are a little bit lower velocity, so as much as you have more reciprocating mass in a Mark 19, which if you've ever taken one apart, that bolt's absolutely massive. But it's not going to be as disruptive to the shooting, so you can actually get pretty accurate with it. Also, at 2,212 meters max effective range, you have an indirect fire capability now in your technical. So if you integrate that into a group with a whole bunch of other types of weapon systems, as you go and seize that key terrain, you're giving yourself a lot of additional firepower, high explosive firepower at that point, which is pretty awesome. Now, anybody who's ever actually worked around a Mark 19 knows that you live and die by how the previous owner took care of the Mark 19, because for some reason, Mark 19s are really difficult for people to understand how to properly maintain, and there are a lot of things that are very specific to the maintenance of a Mark 19. So, to all of us who've ever had to deal with that, here's to you. However, increasing that anti-armor capability is absolutely clutch. Now, are you going to necessarily take out like a T-62? Probably not. But you could hit a T-62 enough that you could really complicate its operations and potentially make it so that something else larger could take out the T-62. So it's not completely useless for that type of application. It's just not the best. Generally, I don't recommend automatic grenade launchers. I've had too many bad experiences with them. But this is a circumstance where I could really see it being very advantageous. All right, going from there, we're going to talk about the Zeus 23. Now, I'm kind of skipping over the 14.5 millimeter Russian heavy machine guns. I have no real experience with them, but they would be a good go-between between a 50 caliber and the 23 millimeter Zeus 23. I have seen examples of the Zeus 23 mounted in the beds of trucks, and it's amazing. That machine gun is cool. But Murph, what's the application? Because you can't really necessarily traverse that system. So it's either mounted forward over the cab, which I doubt the driver would like very much, or it's mounted out of the back of the truck, which I think everyone would prefer. How are you going to utilize that for your purposes? Well, so it could still find a use in ambushes. It's just kind of going to be like what opens your ambush. So you're going to have your kill zone, whatever vehicle is going to come in the kill zone, and then your Zeus 23 is going to open up and take out that vehicle. And you could still bottleneck a convoy that way, but that's kind of getting into the nitty-gritty on a particular situation. We're not going to spend too much time on that. There are a couple of areas that I think the Zeus 23 would really come in handy. One would be hardpoint defeat. You have an enemy machine gun nest or bunker or something like that. It just seems like nobody can get through. You roll up a Zeus 23, give that thing a clear line of fire, it's probably going to make somebody want to back out of that position real fast with a definite quickness, that's for sure. In addition to that, if you were running the defensive side of things and you had an enemy buildup coming at a specific hardpoint, you could move multiple Zeus 23s around your defensive position in order to be able to dissuade whatever type of buildup. And it is getting kind of specific, but think about it. You're holding a defensive position, the enemy's attacking a couple different areas, probing for weaknesses. They identify a weakness, and now they send a mass group of whatever at that particular point. You could bring in a Zeus 23 or two and be able to level that attacking force. It would definitely dissuade them from wanting to continue the hard point, attacking that hard point. And then it being on a technical and being very mobile, you could move it to another position. You don't have to have them in fixed positions at that point. So something to consider with that. Of course, it's still going to be difficult to aim. Not going to get away from that, but there is an application. It's just very niche. And that's kind of the trend that we're going with here now, is that we're getting into kind of niche applications. So one of my favorite examples of a technical is having an S5K rocket pod attached to it. I saw this, I think it was a picture out of Africa, where this dude had a controller hooked up to the back of the rocket pod, because of course it's electrically initiated, so you just have to figure out how to be able to splice into that system. And now all of a sudden you have a DIY MLRS. Now, is it as good as like the actual MLRS, you know, the 5-inch rockets and all that kind of stuff? No. But it's 57mm rockets that you can fire indirectly at an opposing target. It is expanding your indirect capability. That's pretty cool. Especially since those warheads come with anti-armor capability and all that kind of stuff as well. So if you could rig a contraption for sighting, which is going to be the hardest part of all of this, then you could actually make pretty good effect of that weapon system, even in a direct fire capability. So it's an interesting little piece of ingenuity I've gotten studying different types of technicals over the years. Now, one of the best applications I feel for the technical is the mounting of a recoilless rifle. Now, for the uninitiated, a lot of people feel that recoilless rifles are kind of like gone out of style, that they're not a thing anymore, but they absolutely are. They've just changed. The Carl Gustav is a recoilless rifle. The AT-4 is a recoilless rifle. It's just a single-use one. At one time, countries utilized tripod-mounted recoilless rifles. And there have been examples of recoilless rifles being adapted to technicals. I have personal experience with that. The great thing about that is you get a low velocity, low recoil anti-tank weapon system. It comes about from two different methods. Most of the time you're going to see heat high explosive anti-tank, which takes an explosive shape that formulates what we refer to as a jet or a molten needle that then slices through the armor, and that's not going to be helpful for anyone on the inside. You're either going to immobilize a critical tank system, you might kill a crew member, you could set off like the fuel, any of those types of things. And then you also have your high explosive plastic or high explosive squash head, which is a projectile, a high explosive projectile that when it impacts armor, it mushrooms out almost like a hollow point against the armor and then detonates. And what that does is it takes the inside of the armor and it spalls it outwards, and it sends fragments of the interior of the tank bouncing around all over the inside of the tank. Tank's a pretty confined space. You can understand how you wouldn't want to have that happen to you. So now you're taking a very lightweight, highly mobile vehicle and you're giving it the ability to kill tanks, or at least massively complicate a tank's life. That's pretty awesome. Now, of course, this vehicle, not being armored, is not going to necessarily be able to go muzzle to muzzle with a tank. You're not going to have like something out of Fury where you got like, where you got like a Sherman going like up against the barrel, going muzzle to muzzle with like a Tiger and stuff like that, and trying to get around behind to be able to pump some rounds in there. That's not what we have going on. The technical is going to get 1, maybe 2 shots off at a tank before it needs to displace. Because the tank, especially when we're talking about an unarmored technical, has a coax machine gun. It has multiple methods of being able to kill that technical without even having to use its main gun. Which, for a tank, would be kind of a waste of a round because it has machine guns on it. So why would it necessarily want to go after that vehicle with a high explosive anti-tank, or even like an AP round? Like, that would be a very silly choice to make at that point. So the technical is going to want to get out of there as fast as it can, because the tank's going to be able to track it and shoot it with a machine gun a lot faster than it's going to be able to go after it with the main gun. But you could see where you could do some hit and fade attacks against like a tank column, smash 8, have 4 vehicles that smash 8 rounds into that tank column, massively complicate that tank column's movement, and then bounce out before anyone can actually effectively get a shot off or pursue them. That's pretty fantastic. All right, now I think the ultimate application of the technical weapon system or weapons platform is a recent advancement that the US has made, where they have made a drop-in package that can attach to like a Toyota Hilux and have guided missiles available for use. Now, of course, you're going to have to be in tight with like the CIA or something like that for you to be able to get that for your particular type of technical. But having the ability to be able to shoot down aircraft if you're fighting an opponent who has them, that's a game changer. Or being able to target different types of weapon systems from a greater distance away that a guided missile would give you, that's a game changer. So, if you're fighting an opponent that has that type of capability, you have probably crossed the U.S. and didn't even realize it. Because otherwise, trade sanctions probably would have been the thing that indicated that. I can't remember the name of the system, guys, so I'll annotate that down below. But that is how I see it being the best application of that type of truck gun. Turning your truck into a gun, essentially. All right, guys, I'm out of scotch, so this seems like a very good time to go ahead and finish this video. I hope you guys found this interesting. I would like to hear what your thoughts are on the best application. You might have noted that I left out the minigun. The minigun would fit into the same category as like the M16, the 240, and all that kind of stuff. The minigun is not better because it shoots faster. And that's actually where I prefer those other weapon systems because they have a little bit lower rate of fire, which means that there will be better control of the weapon system overall for ammunition. Because we're talking about insurgent forces or some type of asymmetric warfare. You don't necessarily have Uncle Sam's payroll to be able to just keep funding 7.62 ammunition into your coffers. So keep that in mind as well. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting. That's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.